All right guys, now we're going to talk a little bit about understanding declination. This is not always easy, and you can see by this very masterful piece of art that our highly creative art department has put together for you. It might make it even harder, but I'm going to attempt to walk through this and see if it makes sense to you. So let's talk about how this happens. First of all, let's look down here at this representation again from our very skilled art department, that this is supposed to look something like a globe. When we're dealing with declination, we've got a few options to choose from. Grid north, magnetic north, and true north. We're going to break those down for you a little bit and show you where we're going to go from there. So let's start with true north. True north is actually the North Pole where, Santa Claus and all those guys hang out, which is actually where longitude lines point to and come to the center of. Magnetic north is slightly off of true north, or the North Pole, and it's where your compass will actually pull to. So we have to compensate for that because we have to figure out how to get the scale on a map and a scale on the compass to match up to make sure we're on the same spot on the Earth. So that results in what's called a GM angle. Now, let's go to this for a minute, but then we're going to move away from this and get a little bit more to our map. What I have here, the GN represents grid north, TN represents true north, and the arrow over here represents magnetic north. True north is used when you're working with longitude and latitude maps. We're not going to be working with longitude and latitude. We're working with the UTM grid system. Therefore, we're going to be paying attention to grid north and magnetic north. So basically what happens is, this is where your compass is pointing. This is where the north grid line is on your map. The distance or angle between those two is known as the GM angle, and that's what we have to correct for. What we have here is a representation of grid line. Over here we have magnetic north. That's called the declination, and in this instance that declination is 15 degrees. What we have to make sure is where we navigate and look with our compass and where we navigate and look with our map are in sync with each other. So here's how we do that. Again, admire the art. I'm raging about it here. So we're going to have to do a conversion on this 15 degrees. Convert magnetic to grid, we have to add the GM angle. If we're converting grid to magnetic, we have to subtract the GM angle. That's a little mathematical problem you'll have to do on your own, and then you adjust for the declination on your map, or you adjust for the declination on your compass. It's important to know that if magnetic north is pointing this direction, then your conversion is going to be basically the exact opposite of the one over there. You're going to take magnetic north to grid north, subtract the GM angle. Grid north to magnetic north, add the GM angle. That's a very simplified version of how you deal with declination. And oh, by the way, when you get up around the North Pole, things get really screwy, and we're not going to be teaching any of that during this block of training. All right, we had our art department call back in because we didn't feel like we gave you a fair enough representation and broke it down quite enough. So we're going to break it down a little bit better for you. Bear with me. And by the way, we fired the last guy, and clearly he done a little bit better job on this. So just so you know, this little declination diagram is located at the bottom of your map. And here's what it simply means. Grid north on your map is the grid lines that point north. So on your map, if you were looking directly north at the top of your map, maybe your grid north line would intersect with this hilltop. However, if you were standing at the same exact spot on the ground as this little guy right here, with your compass, you would actually be looking out across this area over here. Therefore, you realize you have a 15-degree declination between the 2 points. That's where you have to use these conversions. If you're trying to get your magnetic azimuth back to your grid, or your grid azimuth back to magnetic, you use the items listed here. All right guys, a little bit earlier we talked about declination diagram down in the lower center margin of the map. Very important to know because we're going to be using both a compass and a map to navigate. You'll notice here you have MN. That stands for magnetic north, and that's what this line is depicting right here. You see GN over here, which is the line for grid north. You'll notice that there's a gap between those two. That is the declination. It's also depicted over here in degrees. You'll see that it's almost 6 degrees. So we're going to go ahead and use 6 degrees. We have to convert this in order to plot this on our map. So there's two things that need to happen. If you have a magnetic azimuth and want to plot it on a map, you have to change it to a grid azimuth. If you have a grid azimuth and want to plot it on a map, you have to change it to a magnetic azimuth. What's going on here is the magnetic north pole is not in a perfect align with grid north of the map. Therefore, you have to make the necessary correction. In this particular instance, you'll notice that we have a westerly declination on our magnetic north diagram. To convert a magnetic azimuth to a grid azimuth, you have to subtract the GM angle, which we're going to call 6 degrees. To convert the grid azimuth to a magnetic azimuth, we would actually add the GM angle of almost 6 degrees. This way we ensure that we're always navigating in the proper direction on the ground and we're plotting in the proper direction on the map.